Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into something seriously creepy for chilling tales of haunted houses. That'll make you think twice about that cozy fixer-upper you've been eyeing. From shadowy figures lurking in basements to neighbors who know more than they're letting on. These stories are packed with goosebumps and unanswered questions. If you love a good scare or just can't resist a mystery, stick around. And hey, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and don't forget to ring that bell so you never miss a spooky upload. Let's get into it. Story 1. The house in Blackwood. I moved to Blackwood a few months ago, right after my husband passed away. I just needed to get away, you know? Somewhere quiet where I could breathe and maybe start over. The house I bought was this old place with white walls and blue shutters, creaky floors, and a big porch that looked like it had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it felt cozy at first, like it could be mine. The neighbors were super nice too, always stopping by with pies or asking how I was settling in. Mrs. Lyell from next door even brought me a quilt she'd made herself. The town had this warm, small town vibe that made me think I'd finally found some peace. But that didn't last long. Maybe a week in, I started hearing these faint scratching sounds inside the walls at night. I figured it was just mice, or something. Old houses have that kind of thing, right? But it kept happening every night, like clockwork, and it wasn't just in one spot, it moved around. The scratching was weird, but I brushed it off until other stuff started happening. One morning I woke up and all the lights in the kitchen were off, even though I'd left them on before bed. I'm paranoid about the dark since living alone. Then I noticed little things weren't where I'd left them, like my coffee mug was on the counter instead of the sink, or my keys were by the door when I swore I'd tossed them on the table. It freaked me out, but I told myself I was just forgetting things, maybe still messed up from grief. Then I started feeling watched. Not like a vague feeling, but this heavy, prickly sensation on the back of my neck. One night, I caught a shadow in the windows, reflection just a flicker, gone when I turned around. I checked outside, but there was nothing, no one. The vents started creeping me out too. I'd walk by and swear I saw something move behind the slats, like eyes following me. I couldn't shake the idea that the house didn't want me there, or worse, it was sizing me up. It wasn't just the house messing with me. The neighbors started acting off too. Mrs. Lyell would show up unannounced, standing on my porch with that big smile, asking if I'd heard any funny noises lately. Mr. Green, this old guy from across the street, kept watching me from his yard, leaning on his rake like he was waiting for something. Their friendliness didn't feel warm anymore. It felt like they were keeping tabs on me. I'd catch them staring at my house when they thought I wasn't looking. And once, I saw Mrs. Lyell scribbling something in a little notebook after we talked. I tried asking her about the house's history, hoping for answers, but she just laughed and said, "Oh, it's got character." That's when the drawings started showing up. One morning, I found a charcoal sketch of my house shoved in my mailbox. No note, no name. It was detailed, down to the chipped paint on the shutters, and it gave me chills. I thought maybe some kid was pranking me, but it didn't feel like a joke. The drawings kept coming every couple of days, and they got worse. The second one was of me standing on the porch, looking out at the street. I recognized the sweater I'd been wearing the day before, and my stomach dropped. I started locking all the doors and windows, even during the day, but it didn't help. The third drawing was the one that broke me. Me, asleep in my bed. My face half lit by the moonlight coming through the window. It was drawn from inside my room, right above me. I hadn't heard a thing that night. No footsteps, no creaks, nothing. I tore the house apart looking for cameras or some sign someone had been inside, but there was nothing. That's when I noticed the basement Dorrits, this heavy wooden thing I'd barely touched since moving in. It was cracked open just a little, even though I'd locked it. I don't know why, but I grabbed a flashlight and went down there. Big mistake. The basement smelled like damp earth and something sour I couldn't place. The stairs groaned under my weight, and the air got colder the deeper I went. My flashlight beam shook a little. I was terrified, but I had to know what was going on. The basement was mostly empty. Just some old boxers the previous owner left behind and a cracked concrete floor. But then I saw it, a weird seam in the far wall, like a panel that didn't quite fit. I pushed on it, and it gave way with this awful scraping sound, revealing a tunnel. It was narrow, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, with rough dirt walls and a ceiling so low I had to hunch over. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself to turn back, but I couldn't. Whoever drew me sleeping had been in my house, and this felt like the only clue. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the darkness swallowing me up. The tunnel was suffocating, literally and figuratively. The air was thick, like it hadn't moved in years, and every step kicked up dust that made me cough. My flashlight caught little details, scratches on the walls, like someone had clawed at them, and these tiny cracks that ran like veins through the dirt. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Faces. Not real ones, but shapes in the cracks, like eyes and mouths peeking out at me. I told myself it was just my imagination, shadows playing tricks, but they moved when I did, tracking me. I froze, shining the light around, and that's when I found the notebook. It was wedged in a crevice, old and yellowed, with my name written over and over on the first page dozens of times in this frantic, jagged handwriting. I flipped through it, and there were dates, times, notes about what I'd done that day. She watered the plants at 3:15. She cried at 8:47. Someone had been watching me from the start. I dropped the notebook like it burned me, my hands shaking so bad I almost lost the flashlight. Whoever wrote that knew everything about me, every move. Every moment I thought I was alone. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like jelly, and the tunnels seemed to stretch on forever. I kept going though, because I had to know how far this went, how deep the house was, hiding something. The faces in the cracks were still there, staring, and now I could hear this faint whispering like voices, too soft to make out, coming from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't loud, but it crawled under my skin, making me feel like I wasn't alone down there. I stumbled over something a loose board and, when I looked down, I saw initials carved into it. TW, that's when it hit me. Thomas Work, the guy who built this house. The neighbors had mentioned him once, said he was a loner who liked his privacy. Yeah, right. The tunnel opened up a little, just enough for me to stand straight, and I found this small hollowed out room. It was like a nest piles of old papers, a rusted chair, and more drawings pinned to the walls. All of me. Some were rough sketches, others so detailed I could see the fear in my own eyes. My flashlight flickered, and I swear the air got heavier, like something was pressing down on me. Then I saw it, a skeletal figure hunched in the corner, barely visible in the dark. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it watching me, its head tilted like it was curious. I couldn't tell if it was a person or something else. My throat closed up, and I backed away, tripping over the chair. The whispering got louder, sharper, like it was mad I'd found this place. I turned to run, and that's when I heard footsteps, slow, dragging ones coming from where the figure had been. It was following me. I ran faster than I thought I could, the tunnel walls scraping my arms as I went. The footsteps behind me didn't speed up, but they didn't stop either, just this steady, awful thud-thud echoing in the dark. My flashlight kept flickering, and every time it dimmed, I swore that thing was closer, its bony outline sharper in the shadows. I could still hear the whispering, but now it sounded like my name, over and over, like a chant. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could think about was getting out, getting away from whatever was down there. The air felt alive, buzzing with something I can't explain, like the house itself was pissed I'd found its secret. My chest burned, but I kept going until I saw the basement panel ahead. I threw myself through it, slamming it shut behind me, and for a second, I just sat there on the cold floor, trying to catch my breath. The footsteps stopped right on the other side. I didn't feel safe, though not even close. The basement was dead quiet now, but that made it worse, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for my next move. I scrambled up the stairs, locking the door behind me, and ran to the kitchen to grab my phone. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but my hands were shaking too much to dial. That's when I noticed the lights flickering again, not just in the kitchen, but all over the house, like a pulse. I looked out the window, and Mrs. Lyle was standing on her porch, staring right at me with that creepy smile. Mr. Green was there too, in his yard, just watching. It hit me hard, they knew. They'd always known something was wrong with this place, and they'd let me walk right into it. I grabbed my keys, thinking I'd drive away and never come back. But then I heard a slow creak from the basement door. It was opening again, even though I'd locked it. Whatever was down there wasn't done with me. I stood there, frozen, staring at the basement door as it creaked open inch by inch. My key slipped from my hand and hit the floor, but I barely noticed the sound of that door was all I could hear. It wasn't just a noise. It felt like the house was taunting me, daring me to look. I didn't want to, but I had to. I grabbed the flashlight again and peeked down the stairs. The panel was wide open now, and that skeletal thing was there, standing at the bottom, its head tilted up at me. It didn't have eyes, just these black hollows, but I swear it saw me. My stomach twisted, and I felt this cold sweat drip down my back. The whispering started again, louder, like it was coming from the walls all around me now, not just the tunnel. I slammed the door shut and shoved a chair under the knob, praying it'd hold. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I'd pass out. I backed away, tripping over my own feet, and ran to the front door. I was done this house could keep its secrets. I just wanted out. But when I got there, the lock wouldn't turn. I twisted the knob, yanked at it. Nothing worked. The lights flickered faster, and I heard that dragging footsteps again, coming up the stairs this time. I turned around, and it was halfway up, moving slow but steady, its bony hands scraping the railing. I screamed. I couldn't help but hand bolted to the living room, looking for anything to defend myself. The air was thick, like I was breathing through a wet cloth, and the whispering turned into this low, guttural hum that rattled my teeth. I grabbed a lamp, yanking the cord out of the wall, and held it like a bat. The thing reached the top of the stairs and stopped, just staring at me with those empty sockets. Then the lights went out completely, and the room went black. The darkness was suffocating. I couldn't see a thing, just felt that hum vibrating through the floorboards. I gripped the lamp tighter, my knuckles aching, and listened for those footsteps. They started again, slow and deliberate, getting closer. I swung the lamp blind, hitting nothing but air, and stumbled back until I crashed into the couch. My flashlight was still in my pocket. I fumbled for it, hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. When I flicked it on, the beam caught that skeletal thing right in front of me, maybe 5 feet away. It wasn't moving now, just standing there, its head cocked like it was studying me. The whispering was deafening, a mix of my name and words I couldn't understand, like a dozen voices arguing inside my skull. I couldn't breathe. Right every inhale felt like I was choking on dust. I swung the lamp again, and this time it hit something solid, making a dull thud. The figure didn't flinch, but it took a step closer. I don't know how I didn't just collapse right there. My whole body was screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The front door was locked. The windows wouldn't budge when I tried them earlier, and that thing was blocking the stairs. I darted toward the kitchen, thinking maybe I could get out the back, but the floor creaked behind. MIT was following, slow and relentless. I grabbed a knife from the counter, my hands slick with sweat, and spun around. The flashlight beam shook as I aimed it at the doorway. It was there, filling the frame, its bony fingers curled around the wood. The hum turned into this sharp, piercing sound, like a scream stretched thin, and the air got so cold I could see my breath. I yelled at it to leave me alone, my voice cracking, but it just tilted its head again. Then it lunged fast, way faster than it had moved beforehand. I swung the knife, slashing at nothing as I fell back against the sink. The lights flickered back on, and it was gone. I stood there panting, the knife still in my hand, waiting for it to come back. The kitchen was bright again, the lights steady like nothing had happened, but I wasn't fooled. My ears were ringing from that scream, and my arms were covered in goosebumps from the cold that hadn't left. I checked the doorway empty, no footsteps, no whispering, just silence so thick it felt wrong. I didn't trust it. I crept back to the living room, knife out, flashlight sweeping every corner. The lamp I'd swung was on the floor, smashed, but there was no sign of that thing. My chest hurt from how fast my heart was going, and I kept hearing my own ragged breathing, loud in the quiet. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, that I'd lost it from all the stress. But then I saw the scratches, fresh ones, deep in the wood by the stairs where its hands had been. This was real, and it wasn't over. I needed to get out now. I ran back to the front door, slamming my shoulder against it, and this time the lock clicked open like it had never been stuck. I didn't question. E.T. just bolted outside, the night air hitting me like a slap. I stumbled onto the porch, barefoot, and looked around. Mrs. Lyle was still there, on her porch, watching me with that same damn smile. Mr. Green was in his yard, rake in hand, staring too. Neither of them moved, just stood there like statues, their eyes locked on me. I screamed at them, "What the hell is wrong with you people?" But they didn't answer. The house behind me felt alive, like it was breathing down my neck, and I swore I heard that hum again, faint but growing. I took off down the street, not caring where I was going, just away. My car was still in the driveway, but I wasn't going back for it, not with that thing in there. I kept running until I hit the edge of town, my lungs burning, and collapsed by the road. When I looked back, the house was dark, no lights, no movement like it had gone to sleep. I sat there by the road, shaking, trying to make sense of what just happened. My feet were cut up from running barefoot, and I could still feel that cold clinging to me, like it had soaked into my bones. The town was quiet, no cars, no dogs barking, just this eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. I kept looking back at the house, expecting to see that skeletal thing standing on the porch, or those creepy neighbors chasing me, but there was nothing. It was like the whole place had shut down the second I got out. My mind was racing Thomas' work, the tunnel, the drawings, the thing get all tied back to the house, but I didn't know how or why. All I knew was I wasn't going back, not for my stuff, not for anything. I'd rather sleep on the street than step foot in there again. The hum was gone, the whispering too, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was still being watched. After a while, I got up and started walking toward the gas station a mile out of town. My phone was still inside the house, so I couldn't call anyone. But I didn't care, just needed to be around people. Somewhere that didn't feel like it was alive. When I got there, the clerk took one look at me wide-eyed, dirty, barefooted, asked if I was okay. I didn't know how to answer. I mumbled something about a break-in and asked to use his phone. I called a friend from back home, told her I needed a place to crash, and she didn't ask too many questions, thank God. While I waited for her to pick me up, I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see Mrs. Lyle or that thing lurking in the dark. Nothing came though. The night stayed quiet, and when my friend showed up, I got in her car and didn't look back. That was it, the house let me go, just like that. No explanation, no goodbye. I still don't know what it wanted from me. It's been weeks since I left Blackwood, and I'm still jumping at every little noise creaking floors. A branch tapping a window, anything. I'm crashing at my friend's place now, and she keeps asking what happened. But I don't know how to tell her without sounding nuts. I mean, how do you explain a house that watches you? A tunnel full of faces? And some skeletal thing that chases you out of your own home? I can't even sleep right. Every time I close my eyes, I see those hollow sockets staring at me, or hear that whispering in my head. I left everything behind. My clothes, my husband's old watch, all of it. I don't care, not going back to get it. Sometimes I wonder if it was Thomas Work's ghost or something he left behind. But then I think about the neighbors and those smiles, and I'm not so sure. Whatever it was, it stopped the second I got out, like it flipped a switch and went quiet. I keep waiting for it to find me again, though. I looked up Blackwood online the other day, just to see if anyone else had stories like mine. Nothing came up, no hauntings, no weird history, just a boring little town with friendly locals. It doesn't make sense, but I'm not digging deeper. I don't want to know. That house is still there, sitting pretty with its white walls and blue shutters, waiting for the next sucker to move in. I drive a different route now, so I never have to pass by, but I can still picture it clear as day. The creaky porch, the vents with eyes, that basement door swinging open. It all happened in one day, one long, awful day, and then it was over. No warning, no reason. I don't get it, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is I got out and I'm alive. That's enough for me. Story: the apartment haunting. I still remember the day I moved into that apartment near campus, about a year and a half ago. It was this old, kinda run-down place with peeling beige paint on the walls and creaky wooden floors that groaned every time. I took a step. The windows were huge but grimy, letting in this dull, grayish light that made everything feel kinda heavy. I was just stoked to have my own spot, you know? It was cheap, close to school, and I didn't care that it smelled like damp wood, or that the faucets rattled before spitting out water. For the first year, it was fine, nothing weird, just me and my books, chilling on this lumpy couch I got off Craigslist. But every now and then, I'd find these long blonde hairs stuck to the cushions or tangled in the rug. My hair's short and brown, and none of my friends have blonde hair either. I'd just shrugged it off, thinking maybe they came from some old tenant or something. It wasn't a big deal until it started getting creepy. It was this one night, about a year in, that everything changed. I was sprawled out on the couch, half watching some dumb show on my laptop, when I heard it clear as day a girl's voice saying my name, Emma. It wasn't loud, but it was close, like she was standing right behind me. My heart just stopped, and I froze, staring at the wall, too scared to turn around. The apartment was dead quiet after that. No footsteps, no nothing, just this thick silence that made my skin crawl. I got up, checked every corner, every closet, nothing. The door was locked, the chain was still on, and I was alone. I tried to laugh it off, like maybe I was just tired, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I texted my friends Aaron and Jenny about it later, and they were all hyped, saying it sounded like a ghost. They even crashed at my place the next weekend to investigate, but I wasn't laughing anymore. That voice stuck with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling something was watching me. That sleepover with Aaron and Jenny didn't exactly calm me down. We were just messing around at first, eating pizza and joking about summoning the spirit with a flashlight under our chins like kids at a campfire. The apartment felt normal that night, same old creaky floors, same faint mildew smell from the bathroom. But around 2 a.m., Jenny bolted upright in her sleeping bag, gasping like she couldn't breathe. She said she'd had this nightmare where she was trapped in my apartment, but it was pitch black and something was moving around her, brushing her arms. She couldn't see it, but she swore she felt it like cold fingers grazing her skin. Aaron and I just stared at her, wide-eyed, while she hugged her knees and tried to shake it off. I didn't sleep after that. The whole place felt different, like the air was thicker or the shadows were sharper. I kept glancing at the hallway, expecting to see something standing there. A couple months later, I came home from class and found a package sitting on my kitchen counter. It was one of those delivery things you have to sign for, addressed to me, but I hadn't been home all day. My stomach dropped high, triple-check my locks every time I leave, and no one else has a key. I called the landlord, this grumpy old guy named Carl, and he swore up and down he didn't let anyone in. The delivery company said it was dropped off inside the residence, but wouldn't say how. I tore the place apart, looking under the bed, behind the curtains, anywhere someone could have snuck in. Nothing was out of place, no blonde hairs even, just that stupid box sitting there like it belonged. I couldn't stop picturing someone walking through my locked door, standing in my kitchen, maybe watching me sleep. It wasn't funny anymore. This wasn't just some weird hairs or a voice. Something was seriously wrong with that apartment. After that package thing, I started noticing more stuff, like how the air in the apartment always felt cold. Even when the heat was cranked up, the place itself was a mess of old details. Warped wooden baseboards, a chipped sink in the bathroom, and this one flickering light in the hallway that I'd given up on fixing. I'd walk past it every day, and sometimes it'd buzz like a dying fly, casting these jittery shadows on the walls. I told myself it was just the building being old, but then my new neighbor Faye moved in next door. She was this sweet old lady with white hair and a shaky voice, always bringing me cookies or asking about school. One day, she pulled me aside in the hall and said she'd been hearing a girl crying from my apartment every afternoon. She looked so serious, her hands trembling as she described its soft sobs, like someone was hurting. I told her I wasn't home most afternoons, and she just stared at me, confused. My chest tightened. I hadn't told her about the voice or the hairs yet. Faye didn't stop there though, and what she said next made my blood run cold. She swore she'd talked to this girl once, through my door, thinking it was me. She said she knocked one day when the crying got loud, and a voice answered quiet, kinda raspy, saying, "I'm fine, just leave me alone." Faye said she saw her through the peephole, a tall figure with long blonde hair, standing in my living room. I almost dropped my keys when she told me that. I don't look anything like that. My hair's short, dark, and I'm barely 5'4". No one else lives with me, and I hadn't had anyone over that day. I mumbled something about it being a friend, but Faye's eyes narrowed like she didn't buy it. I went inside after that, locked the door, and just stood there, staring at the empty room. The blonde hairs, the voice, the package it was all starting to line up, and I didn't like where it was going. I felt sick, like the walls were closing in, watching me. I couldn't let it go after Faye said that timing. How do you ignore something like that? I started asking around, trying to figure out if this place had a history. The landlord, Carl, was no help at first, just grumbling about how old tenants always leave junk behind. But after I pushed him, he let slip that the girl who lived here before me, Lucy, took off out of nowhere. He said she left all her stuff, clothes, books, even a half-eaten box of cereal just bolted one day and never came back. The cops looked into it, but they figured she just skipped town, maybe had a key stashed somewhere. Carl shrugged it off, but I couldn't. I kept picturing this Lucy, blonde maybe, wandering around my apartment, crying or calling my name. The thought of her still having a key made me want to puke. I started jamming a chair under the doorknob every night, just in case. That night, I called my friend James to come over. I needed someone else there, someone who'd believe me. He's this big, chill guy who doesn't scare easy. So we went through the whole place together, checking every inch. The apartment's not big, just a cramped living room, a tiny kitchen, and a bedroom with this scratched up wardrobe I never used. We looked under the couch, behind the fridge, even tapped the walls for hollow spots. Nothing. It was almost a relief until I crashed on the couch later, half asleep, and saw it. The bathroom light was on, this weak yellow glow spilling into the hall, and then a shadow moved across it, tall, thin, blocking the light for just a second. I shot up, heart pounding, and ran to check, but the bathroom was empty. No one was there, no sound. Just that chipped sink staring back at me. James was snoring in the bedroom. He didn't see it, but I knew what I saw. Something was in that apartment with me, and it wasn't just my imagination. I couldn't sleep after that shadow thing. It was like my brain wouldn't shut off. I kept staring at the bathroom doorway from the couch, waiting for it to happen again. The apartment felt alive in the worst way, like every creak of the floor or hum from the fridge was it moving around. I started noticing how the place smelled different that night, not just the usual damp wood, but something sour, like old sweat or wet hair. I told myself it was nothing, but I couldn't stop checking the locks, the windows, even the stupid wardrobe I never opened. James left in the morning, saying I was just stressed, but he didn't get a tie. Wasn't making this up. I demanded new locks from Carl the next day, practically yelling at him over the phone. He grumbled but sent a guy over, and I watched them change every bolt, feeling like it still wasn't enough. That shadow wasn't some burglar, it didn't feel human. By afternoon, I was a wreck, pacing around, jumping at every little noise. The apartment looked the same: dingy walls, that flickering hallway light, the lumpy couch with the blonde hair stuck to it I hadn't noticed before. I pulled it off with shaky fingers, holding it up to the window light. It was long, straight, and pale, just like Faye described. Then I heard it again. Emma, clear as anything, coming from the bedroom this time. My legs went weak, and I just stood there, staring down the hall. The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a knife, soft, almost sad, but wrong. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I grabbed a kitchen knife, feeling like an idiot, and crept toward the bedroom. The door was half open, the way I'd left it, and the room was empty, just my messy bed and a pile of laundry. But the air in there was freezing, and I swear I saw my breath fog up for a second. Whatever it was messing with me, and it knew my name. I stood in that bedroom for what felt like forever, gripping the knife so hard my knuckles hurt. The cold didn't let up. It was like stepping into a freezer, and the rest of the apartment was warm. I kept scanning the room, waiting for something to move, but it was just me and that damn silence again. The wardrobe loomed in the corner, this big ugly thing with scratched doors that never shut right. I'd always ignored it, but now it felt like it was staring back at me. I inched over, heart slamming in my chest, and yanked the doors open. Nothing but dust and a couple old hangers rattling around. I let out this shaky laugh, feeling stupid, but then the floor creaked behind me, loud and sharp, like someone stepped right there. I spun around so fast I almost dropped the knife. No one, nothing, just the empty doorway. My stomach twisted. I wasn't alone, and I couldn't pretend anymore. Whatever this was, it was playing with me, and it was getting bolder. I bolted out of the bedroom and slammed the door shut, like that'd do anything. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the knife, and I backed into the living room, staring at the hall. That's when I noticed the couch cushions one was dented, like someone had just sat there, but I hadn't touched it all day. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, and then the TV flickered on static, loud and crackling, for maybe 3 seconds before it cut off. I didn't even have the remote near me. It was on the kitchen counter, 10 feet away. My head was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The air got heavy again, that sour smell creeping back, and I swear I heard breathing slow, shallow, right behind the couch. I couldn't look, couldn't turn around, just stood there like an idiot, waiting for it to say my name again. This wasn't some old tenant with a key, this was something else, something that didn't belong here, and it was close. I don't know how long I stood there, just listening to that breathing, but it felt like hours. It was faint, almost like a whisper, in and out, right behind me too, reeled to be the wind or the pipes. My whole body was screaming to get out, but I couldn't move, like my feet were glued to the floor. The apartment was suffocating. Now the walls felt tighter, the shadows darker, like the place was shrinking around me. I kept my eyes on the couch, that dented cushion, waiting for something to stand up or crawl out. Then the breathing stopped, and for a split second, I thought it was over, until the hallway light started flickering again, faster this time, buzzing like a swarm of bugs. I whipped my head around, and there it was, a shadow, tall and thin, stretching across the wall at the end of the hall. It wasn't moving, just standing there, but I hadn't seen it before. My throat closed up, I couldn't even scream. All I could do was stare, clutching that knife like it'd saved me. Then it got worse. The shadow shifted, like it turned its head, and I heard the floor creak again. Closer this time, maybe halfway down the hall. I finally snapped out of it and stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet until I hit the front door. I fumbled with the locks, my hands slick with sweat, and glanced back. The shadow was gone, but the light was still flickering, and the bedroom door was open again. I hadn't touched it tied, slammed it shut. My chest was heaving, and I could feel my pulse in my ears, loud and fast. I yanked the door open and ran into the hall, barefoot, knife still in my hand, not even caring if Faye or anyone saw me. I just needed out. The air outside hit me like a slap, warm and normal, but I could still feel that cold clinging to my skin. I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe, and that's when I heard it one last time, Emma. Soft and clear, drifting out from my open door. It wasn't mad or loud, just sad, like it wanted me to come back. I didn't go back inside right away, couldn't. I just stood there in the hallway, shaking, listening to the quiet coming from my apartment. The door was still open, swinging a little on its hinges, and that flickering light was spilling out, buzzing like it was taunting me. My knife was useless in my hand, I mean. What was I gonna do? Stab a shadow? Faye's door was right there, and I thought about knocking, begging her to let me in, but I didn't want to drag her into this mess. She'd already heard enough, seen enough. I kept replaying that voice in my head, Emma, and it felt like it was sinking into me, like it knew me somehow. My legs were jelly, but I couldn't just stand there forever. I had to go back in, at least to grab my phone and get the hell out for good. So I took a deep breath, gripped the knife tighter, and stepped back inside, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. The second I crossed the threshold, it hit me the smell again, that sour, wet hair stench, but stronger, like it was everywhere. The living room looked wrong. The couch cushions were all messed up now, not just dented but shoved to one side, like someone had been thrashing around on it. The TV was off, but the remote was on the floor, halfway across the room. I didn't stop to think. I bolted for my bedroom to grab my phone off the nightstand. The cold was back, biting at my arms, and the wardrobe doors were wide open again, hangers swinging like something had yanked them. I snatched my phone and turned to run, but then I saw it in the corner of my eye, a flash of blonde hair, long and tangled, disappearing behind the couch. I screamed this time, loud and raw, and stumbled toward the door. The floor creaked under me, fast and heavy, like footsteps chasing me, and I swear I felt something brush my shoulder cold, clammy like a hand. I didn't look back, I just ran. I made it to the hallway again, slamming the door behind me so hard the frame rattled. My phone was in one hand, the knife in the other, and I was crying now, snot and all, not even caring how I looked. The footsteps stopped the second the door shut, like whatever it was didn't follow me out. I collapsed against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the gross carpet, trying to catch my breath. My shoulders still tingled where I'd felt that touch, and I kept rubbing it, like I could wipe it off. The hallway was quiet, just the usual hum of the building. But my apartment felt like a black hole behind that door, dark, heavy, waiting. I called James, barely getting the words out, and he said he'd be there in 10 minutes. I didn't move, just sat there, staring at the door, half expecting it to creak open on its own. But it didn't. It just stayed shut, silent, like nothing had happened. James showed up, looking freaked out when he saw me barefoot, wild-eyed, clutching a kitchen knife like a lunatic. I told him everything, tripping over my words, and he dragged me to his car, saying I could crash at his place. We didn't go back inside. I wouldn't let him, and honestly, he didn't push it. As we drove off, I kept looking back at the building, that grimy window on the second floor where my apartment was. I swear I saw something move behind the glass, just a flicker, tall and thin, standing there watching me leave. My stomach lurched, but I didn't say anything to James. He was already muttering about me needing a new place, and I just nodded, numb. When we got to his apartment, I crashed on his couch, still smelling that sour stench in my nose, still hearing that voice in my head. I didn't sleep, I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blonde hair, that shadow, waiting for me to come back. I never went back to that apartment not to live, anyway. The next day, James and Aaron went with me to grab my stuff, and I made them do it fast. The place looked normal when we walked in, no messed up cushions, no blonde hairs, No flickering lights, just the same old dump it had always been. But I wasn't fooled. The air still felt off, like it was holding its breath. I didn't go near the bedroom or the wardrobe, just stood by the door, watching them pack my clothes and books into trash bags. Carl was pissed when I told him I was breaking the lease, but I didn't car, handed him the keys and left. Faye saw me in the hall as we were hauling stuff out, and she just gave me this sad, knowing look, like she got it. I didn't ask her if she still heard the crying. She didn't need to say it. I could feel it in my bones. Whatever was in there wasn't done, even if it let me go. It's been months now, and I'm crashing at James's place until I figure something out. I don't talk about it much. People either think I'm nuts or start asking too many questions, but I can't shake it. The voice, the shadow, that cold touch, it all stopped the second I left, like it was tied to that apartment and just waited there. I still don't know what it was. Some ghost of Lucy, a squatter messing with me, or just my head falling apart. The cops never found her, and Carl won't tell me anything else, so I'm stuck with no answers. Sometimes I dream about it, that grimy window and the figure behind it, calling my name. I wake up sweating, checking the locks, even though I'm miles away. It's over, I guess, but it doesn't feel like it. That place took something from me, and I still don't know what or why it stopped. Story 3, Crestwood's Watchful Eyes. I moved into that old Victorian house in Crestwood, Maine, back in early March, thinking it'd be my little escape from all the city noise. The place was huge, 3 stories of peeling gray paint, tall, narrow windows that looked like eyes, and this sagging porch that creaked under my feet the first time I stepped on it. Inside, it smelled like damp wood and something sour I couldn't place, like the house had been holding its breath for years. The furniture was still there, from the last owner, dusty velvet chairs, a cracked mirror in the hall, and this massive chandelier in the dining room that swayed a little even when there was no breeze. I figured I'd fix it up, make it mine, you know? The town was tiny, just a few streets of old houses and a general store, but the quiet felt good at first. I'd wake up to fog rolling off the woods behind the house, and it was peaceful until it wasn't. That first day, I noticed how the windows seemed to catch every sound from outside, amplifying it, like the house wanted me to hear something. I brushed it off as me being tired from the move, but looking back, that was the start of it all. The weirdness kicked in that afternoon when I was unpacking in the kitchen. It's this big room with faded yellow wallpaper and a heavy oak table that's bolted to the floor. I couldn't move it even if I tried. I was stacking plates when I heard this faint tapping, like fingernails on glass, coming from the window above the sink. I looked out, expecting a branch or something, but there was nothing, just the backyard stretching into the trees, all still and gray under the fog. The tapping stopped when I stared, but then it started again, sharper, from the pantry door behind me. My heart jumped, and I swung around, thinking maybe a mouse got stuck in there. I I opened it, nothing but empty shelves and a stale smell that made my nose itch. I shut it fast, but the tapping kept going, bouncing from the window to the door, back and forth, like something was playing with me. I told myself it was just the house settling, old pipes or whatever, but my hands were shaking when I grabbed my coffee mug. That's when I noticed the mug wasn't where I'd left it. It was on the table, turned upside down, like someone had moved it while I wasn't looking. I tried to shake off the mug thing and just keep unpacking, but the kitchen felt different after that, like the air got thicker, heavier somehow. I moved to the living room next, this big open space with high ceilings and these creepy old portraits on the walls, all faded faces staring down at me. The floorboards groaned under every step, and there was this one spot near the fireplace that felt cold, like I'd walked into a fridge. I bent down to feel it, and my fingers brushed something sticky, looked like old wax, dark red, smeared into the wood. I scrubbed it off with a rag, but the whole time, I kept hearing this low hum, like a voice too quiet to make out, coming from the walls. It wasn't loud, but it got under my skin, made my stomach twist. I turned on the radio to drown it out, some staticky country station, but the hum cut through anyway, steady and stubborn. By then, the sun was dipping low, and the light coming through those tall windows turned everything orange and sharp, stretching shadows across the room that didn't match anything I could see. I decided to head upstairs to unpack my bedroom stuff, figuring I'd feel better once I had my own space set up. The staircase was narrow, all dark wood with a banister that wobbled if you touched it, and every step creaked like it was complaining. Halfway up, I stopped. There was this smell, faint at first, like wet dirt and something sweet gone bad. Drifting down from the landing, I pushed through it, telling myself it was just mold or something old houses have. But when I got to the top, the air felt wrong, like it was pressing against me. My bedroom was at the end of the hall, past a bunch of closed doors I hadn't checked yet, and the whole hallway was lined with this faded floral wallpaper that peeled at the edges. I noticed one door was cracked open just a bit, and when I passed it, I swear I heard a rustle like fabric brushing against fabric coming from inside. I froze, staring at the gap, but it was too dark to see anything. My chest got tight, and I hurried to my room, slamming the door behind me. The house was messing with me. I could feel it, and it wasn't just in my head. I locked my bedroom door that night, even though it was just me in the house, or at least I thought it was. The room was small, with slanted ceilings and a single window that faced the woods. The glass all warped, so the trees outside looked twisted and blurry. I'd brought my own bed, but the frame that was already there steered a rusty iron thing shoved against the wall, with scratches all over the headboard like something had clawed at it. I tried to ignore it and set up my stuff, but that smell from the hallway followed me in, stronger now, sticking to the back of my throat. I opened the window to air it out, and that's when I heard a low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor downstairs. My whole body went cold, and I stood there, gripping the windowsill, listening as it moved from the living room to the kitchen, slow and deliberate. I told myself it was just the house shifting, but it didn't stop. It kept going, back and forth. Like whatever it was new, I could hear it. I slammed the window shut, heart pounding, and the sound stopped dead, leaving this awful silence that felt worse somehow. I didn't sleep much. After that, Ty just sat on my bed, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the door. Around midnight, the temperature in the room dropped fast, so cold I could see my breath puffing out in little clouds. The walls started creaking, not like before with the wind, but sharp and uneven, like something was leaning against them from the other side. I pulled the blanket tighter, trying to stay calm, but then the doorknob rattled hard, like someone was twisting it. I'd locked it. I knew I had, but it kept going, clattering in the frame, and I just sat there, frozen, watching it shake. My phone was on the nightstand, and I grabbed it to call anyone, but there was no signal, even though I'd had bars earlier. The rattling stopped after a minute, and I thought maybe it was over. But then I heard footsteps, heavy, uneven ones coming up the stairs. They weren't fast, just steady, thumping on each step, getting closer to my door. I held my breath, waiting, but they stopped right outside, and I could feel something there, just on the other side, waiting too. I don't know how long it lasted, felt like hours, but I didn't move, didn't make a sound, too scared to even blink. I don't know when I finally breathed again, but the footsteps didn't come back after that. Just this heavy stillness that made my ears ring. I stayed on the bed, eyes glued to the door, waiting for the next thing, because I knew it wasn't done with me. The house felt alive by then, like it was watching me. And every little sound, the groan of a floorboard, the drip of a faucet, hit me like a punch. Around 2 a.m., I noticed the window again. The warped glass was fogging up, but not from my breath. Something was clouding it from the outside. I got up, legs shaky, and wiped it with my sleeve, expecting to see the woods. But there was nothing, just this thick, swirling gray that pressed against the pane. My stomach dropped, and I backed away. But as I did, the fog started seeping in, curling through the cracks like fingers. Slow and thin at first, then thicker, spilling onto the floor. It didn't feel like normal fog. It was cold, wet, and smelled like that rotting sweet stench from before. I stumbled back to the bed, watching it spread, and the room got darker, like the light was being swallowed up. That's when the whispers started, not loud, but close, like they were right in my ear. I couldn't make out words, just this scratchy, overlapping mess of voices, coming from everywhere: the walls, the ceiling, even the damn bed frame. I slapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. It was like they were inside my head, buzzing and clawing at me. The fog was up to my ankles now, and it felt wrong, sticky, like it was trying to grab me. I yanked my legs up onto the bed, heart slamming in my chest, and that's when I saw it. Shadows moving in the fog, tall and thin, stretching up the walls. They weren't clear, just shapes, but they swayed like they were alive, reaching out with these long, jagged arms. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up fear had me so tight I could barely breathe. The whispers got louder, sharper, and the shadows kept growing, bending toward me like they knew I was there. I don't know how I didn't pass out. I just kept staring, trapped, while the house closed in around me. The shadows didn't stop, they just kept stretching closer, and I swear I could feel them brushing against me, cold and rough like old cloth. I scrambled back on the bed, pressing myself against the headboard. But there was nowhere to go. The room was shrinking, or at least it felt like it, with that fog swallowing everything. The whispers turned into this low chant, still garbled, but it had a rhythm now, like something was being called up. My lamp flickered, then died completely, leaving just the faint glow from the window. But even that was fading as the fog thickened. I grabbed my phone again, desperate for light, and the screen lit up, except it wasn't my lock screen anymore. It was a grainy black and white photo of the house, taken from outside, with those tall windows staring back like eyes. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped it, and when I looked closer, I saw something in one of the windows, a blurry figure standing right where my bedroom was. I threw the phone across the room and it hit the wall with a crack, but the chanting didn't stop it. Got faster, angrier. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up, trying to block it all out. But then the bed started shaking. Not hard, just this steady tremble, like something underneath was waking up. I jumped off, hitting the floor, and the fog swirled around my legs, tugging at me like it wanted to pull me down. The shadows were everywhere now, crowding the walls, and I could hear them moving, not just swaying, but sliding, scraping along the wood. I ran to the door, fumbling with the lock, and yanked it open, half expecting something to be standing there. The hallway was empty, but that smell hit me like a wave, rotting and thick, so bad I gagged. The chanting followed me out, echoing down the stairs, and I could still feel the shadows behind me, like they were chasing me without moving fast. I didn't look back. Couldn't I just bolted down the hall, barefoot, the floorboards splintering under my feet? The house was alive. I knew it then, and it wasn't letting me go easy. All I could think was I had to get out, but every step felt like wading through mud. I made it to the stairs, but they didn't feel right anymore. The wood was soft, almost spongy, like it was rotting under me as I ran. Every step sank a little, and I could hear this wet, sucking sound, like the house was trying to swallow my feet. The banister was ice cold and slick, and when I grabbed it, my hand came away with this black slime that stank like death. I wiped it on my shirt, gagging, and kept going, but halfway down, the stairs started tilting, like actually moving, slanting to one side. I stumbled, grabbing the wall, and that's when I saw the wallpaper peeling back in chunks, curling up like it was alive. Underneath, the plaster was cracked and oozing this dark, thick stuff that dripped onto the steps. The chanting was louder now, bouncing off the walls, and I could feel it in my chest, like it was trying to squeeze my heart. I don't know how I didn't fall, but I hit the bottom of the stairs hard, my knees slamming into the floor. and the whole house shook with me, like it was laughing. The living room was a nightmare when I got there. The portraits on the walls weren't just staring anymore. Their eyes were moving, following me as I staggered across the room. The chandelier was swinging wild now, clinking and rattling, and every time it swayed, it threw these jagged shadows that danced across the floor. The cold spot by the fireplace was worse, like stepping into a freezer, and that red wax was back, pooling up through the cracks in the wood, spreading like blood. I tried the front door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, or locked, or maybe the house just wouldn't let me out. I pounded on it, screaming for help, but my voice sounded small, like the walls were eating it. The fog from upstairs was creeping down now, sliding over the banister, and those shadows were with it, tall and twisted, crowding around me. I could feel their cold on my skin, brushing my arms, my neck, and the chanting turned into this awful wail that made my ears ache. I was trapped, and the house knew it. I could feel it gloating, tightening around me like a fist. I backed away from the door, tripping over my own feet, and crashed into one of those dusty velvet chairs. The second I hit it, the fabric felt wrong, like it was damp and moving under me, squirming against my skin. I jumped up, and when I looked down, the chair was covered in that black slime from the banister, oozing out of the cushions like it was bleeding. The whole room was shifting now, the walls bulging in and out, like they were breathing, and the ceiling sagged lower, dripping that dark gunk onto the floor. The portraits weren't just watching anymore. Their mouths were open, stretched wide, and this faint raspy sound was coming out, mixing with the wail that wouldn't stop. I ran to the window by the fireplace, smashing my fists against the glass. But it wouldn't break. It bent, like rubber, then snapped back, throwing my hands off. The fog was everywhere, up to my knees, and I could feel it pulling, harder now, like hands wrapping around my legs. I screamed again, but it was useless. The house swallowed it, and the shadows closed in tighter, their jagged edges scraping the air right in front of my face. I turned and bolted for the kitchen, thinking maybe the back door would work, but it was worse in there. The oak table was shaking, rattling against the bolts in the floor, and the yellow wallpaper was peeling off in strips, floating down like dead skin. The tapping was back, louder, slamming against the pantry door so hard it shook in the frame. I grabbed a knife from the counter, just a dull old thing I'd unpacked him, held it out, hands trembling, like it'd do any good. Then the pantry door flew open, and this blast of cold air hit me, carrying that rotting smell so strong I almost puked. Nothing came out, but I heard it ate a deep, guttural laugh, rolling up from somewhere inside the house, shaking the walls. The shadows were behind me, the fog was climbing my legs, and the table lurched forward, scraping the floor like it was trying to get me. I dropped the knife and ran back to the living room, tears streaming down my face because I didn't know where else to go. The house had me cornered, and it was loving every second of it. I stumbled back into the living room, and it was like the house had been waiting for me to crack. The chandelier wasn't just swinging, now it was spinning fast, the crystals clinking like teeth chattering. And then it ripped free from the ceiling, crashing down in a shower of glass right where I'd been standing. I dove out of the way, cutting my hands on the shards, and the fog swallowed the wreckage, swirling around it like it was feeding. The walls were pulsing harder, the dark ooze dripping faster. And those portraits, their faces were gone, just black holes now, screaming that wail straight at me. I crawled toward the stairs, thinking maybe I could hide upstairs again. But the steps were covered in that red wax, bubbling up like it was alive. And the banister twisted, snapping at me like a snake. The shadows were on me, their cold fingers brushing my back, my hair, and I could feel them pulling, not hard, but steady, like they were testing how much I could take. The laugh from the kitchen echoed again, louder, and the floor tilted under me, throwing me against the wall. I was sobbing, begging it to stop, but the house didn't care it was alive, and I was its toy. I don't know how I got the strength, but I dragged myself up, clinging to the wall, and made it to the front door again. The handle was burning cold now, blistering my skin when I grabbed it, but I kept twisting, kicking the wood, anything to get out. The fog was up to my waist, thick and heavy, and the shadows were towering over me, their arms stretching down like they were going to drag me under. The wail turned into this deafening roar, shaking the whole house, and the windows rattled so hard I thought they'd explode. I slammed my shoulder into the door, over and over, and then out of nowhere it flew open, dumping me onto the porch. I hit the ground hard, gasping, and scrambled to my feet, expecting something to yank me back, but nothing did. The fog stopped at the threshold, the shadows froze, and that roar cut off like someone flipped a switch. I ran, didn't look back, didn't grab my stuff, just sprinted down the street, barefoot, crying, until I hit the edge of town. The house went silent behind me, like it was done playing, but I could still feel it watching, waiting. I didn't stop running until I hit the gas station at the edge of Crestwood, my feet bleeding, my lungs burning, and even then, I kept looking over my shoulder, waiting for that fog or those shadows to come after me. The guy behind the counter just stared as I begged for a phone, probably thinking I was nuts, but he let me call a friend from Portland to come get me. I sat there on the curb, shivering, watching the road back to town, and the whole time, I could still feel that house like its eyes were on me, those tall windows glaring through the trees. My friend showed up an hour later, and I didn't say much, just climbed in the car and told her to drive, fast. We left Crestwood behind, and I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following me somehow. The cuts on my hands stung. My throat was raw, and I couldn't stop shaking, but I was out. I thought that'd be it, that getting away would fix it, but it didn't. I still hear that laugh sometimes, late at night, like it's stuck in my head, and I can't shake the feeling that the house isn't done with me. I never went back, not for my stuff, not for anything. I heard from someone later that the house is still there, just sitting empty, same as always, like nothing happened. I've tried to tell myself it was stress, or bad wiring, or something normal, but I know better. That place wasn't just old or creepy, it was wrong, like it had a mind of its own, and it wanted me to know it. I live in an apartment now, miles away, but I can't sleep with the lights off anymore, and I check my locks 3 times a night. Sometimes I dream about it, the fog, the shadows that wail it. I wake up choking, like I'm still there. The worst part, it stopped so sudden, like it let me go on purpose, and I don't know why. I keep wondering if it's waiting for me to come back, or if it's already found me again, just quieter this time. I don't have answers, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is that house in Crestwood isn't normal, and if you're ever near Story 4. Alyssa's return. I moved back to my hometown a few months ago with my wife Sarah and our little girl, just trying to settle into a quieter life after years in the city. The house next door was this old, run-down, place-peeling gray paint, crooked shutters, windows so foggy you could barely see through them. It had been empty since I was a kid, but then Lisa showed up. She looked so much like Alyssa, my high school crush who died in that awful car wreck. Senior year, same dark hair, same sharp cheekbones, same pale skin that almost glowed in the sun. At first, I thought it was just a weird coincidence. She'd wave at me during the day, all smiles, asking about the neighborhood like she belonged there. But at night, I'd catch her staring from her bedroom window, right into ours and blinking, just standing there in the dark. It wasn't a casual glance. It was this intense, hollow look that made my stomach twist. Sarah laughed it off, said I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with that house and with Lisa. It started getting worse about a week after we moved in. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, and there she'd be, Lisa, framed in that grimy window, her eyes locked on me like she could see into my head. The house itself felt off too. The air inside was always damp, like it was holding on to something old and sour. You'd hear creaks all the time, not just the normal settling noises, but sharp snaps from the floorboards upstairs where no one was walking. I tried talking to Sarah about it, but she'd just roll her eyes and say it was an old house playing tricks on me. One afternoon, I even went over to Lisa's place to ask her to stop staring, knocked on her chipped red door. But no answer, just silence so thick it buzzed in my ears. That night, she was back at the window, same spot, same stare. I called the cops once, but they said she wasn't breaking any laws. Just standing there wasn't a crime. I wanted to believe Sarah, that I was overreacting. But every time I looked at that house, with its sagging roof and shadows that seemed too dark, I felt like it was watching me back. The real nightmare kicked in one night when I couldn't sleep, maybe 2 a.m. The whole house dead quiet, except for this faint creak coming from downstairs. It wasn't the usual floorboard groan. It was slow, deliberate, like someone was stepping soft on purpose. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed, heart thumping so loud I could hear it in my ears, and crept down the hall. The air felt heavy, almost sticky, and the closer I got to the stairs, the colder it got, like walking into a freezer. When I peeked out the living room window, there was Lisa, standing in our yard, her nightgown flapping in the wind even though it was a still night. She wasn't alone. Sarah was with her, barefoot in her pajamas, eyes wide open but blank, like she was sleepwalking. I froze, couldn't even breathe, watching Lisa lean in close and whisper something to her. I swear I heard it through the glass. She belongs to me now. My legs felt like jelly, but I wanted to run out there, scream at them. Anything but. I just stood there, gripping that bat, too scared to move. When I finally snapped out of it and bolted outside, Lisa was gone like she'd melted into the dark hand. Sarah was just standing there, staring at nothing. I grabbed her arm, shook her, yelled her name, but she didn't blink, didn't flinch, just let me drag her back inside. The house smelled wrong that night, like damp earth and something sour I couldn't place, and every shadow in the corners looked too sharp, too alive. Sarah didn't say a word when I got her back to bed, just sat there, eyes glassy, until she finally passed out. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened, made coffee, kissed me goodbye, but something was off. That night, I caught her at her window, staring back at Lisa's house, same blank look on her face. I asked her what she was doing, but she just smiled slow, weird, not her smile, and said, "She's waiting." I felt sick, like the house itself was laughing at me. Its cracked walls and warped floors hiding something I couldn't fight. I barely slept after that. Every creak, every rustle outside had me jumping up, checking the windows, the doors, anything to feel like I had some control. The house next door looked worse in the dark, its outline jagged against the sky, like it was leaning closer to ours, hungry or something. That afternoon, I tried boarding up our bedroom window, hammering nails into the frame while Sarah watched me like I was nuts. She didn't say much anymore, just drifted around the house, humming this low tune I'd never heard before. I kept catching her staring at Lisa's place, not just at night, but during the day too. Her head tilted like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. The air in our house got thicker, like it was pressing down on me, and I'd swear the walls felt soft sometimes, like they'd give if I pushed hard enough. I wanted to pack up and leave, but Sarah wouldn't even talk about it, said we were fine, that I was imagining things, but I wasn't. I knew it was that house, Lisa, whatever she was, pulling strings I couldn't see. That night, it hit a whole new level. I woke up to Sarah gone from bed, the sheets cold where she'd been. I stumbled downstairs, calling her name, and found the front door wide open, the damp night air spilling in. My chest tightened as I stepped outside, barefoot on the wet grass, and saw them, Sarah and Lisa, standing together in front of that rotting house. Lisa's hand was on Sarah's shoulder, and they were both staring up at our daughter's room where the light was flickering, even though I knew I'd turned it off. I yelled for Sarah, my voice cracking, but neither of them moved, just stood there, still as statues. The house behind them looked alive somehow, the windows glinting like eyes, the porch sagging like a mouth ready to swallow something. I ran toward them, but my legs felt slow, heavy, like the ground was sucking me down. When I got close, Lisa turned her head slow, too slow, and her eyes were black. Not dark brown like Alyssa's, but pure black, like holes. I stopped dead, couldn't move, couldn't scream, just watched as Sarah turned her face blank, her eyes starting to darken. I don't know how long I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching Sarah's eyes turn that awful black while Lisa just stared at me, her lips twitching like she was fighting a smile. The air around the house buzzed, this low hum that vibrated in my chest, and I swear the grass under my feet felt slimy, like it was rotting right then and there. I wanted to grab Sarah, drag her back inside, but my arms wouldn't move, like something was holding me back, something I couldn't see. The house loomed bigger than it should have, its cracked siding peeling back like skin, and I kept thinking about Alyssa, how she'd died all those years ago, how this couldn't be her, but felt like her anyway. Sarah took a step toward Lisa's porch, and I finally snapped out of it, lunging forward, yelling her name again. She didn't even flinch, just kept walking, slow and steady, like she was being pulled. I grabbed her wrist, and her skin was ice cold, so cold it burned my hand. But she didn't look at me, just kept staring at that house with those empty eyes. I yanked her back toward our place, my heart slamming against my ribs. And she didn't fight me, just let me pull her inside like a rag doll. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and shoved a chair under the knob, panting like I'd run a mile. The house was dead quiet again, but it didn't feel safe. Every corner looked wrong, the shadows stretching too long across the floor. Sarah sat on the couch, staring at nothing, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for something. I kept asking her what happened, what Lisa said, but she wouldn't answer, just hummed that damn tune again, low and steady. peeked out the window, and Lisa was back at her post, staring from her bedroom. But now her head was tilted, like she was studying me. The house around her seemed to pulse, the walls bulging slightly, then settling like it was breathing. I turned back to Sarah, begging her to snap out of it, but she just smiled that creepy smile again and said, "She's not done." My stomach dropped high, knew she meant Lisa, or whatever Lisa was, and I knew it was tied to that house, to every creak and shadow it threw at us. I couldn't take my eyes off Sarah after that. She just sat there, humming, her head cocked like she was hearing something far off. I kept checking the windows, expecting Lisa to be closer, maybe even at our door, but she stayed in her spot, that black-eyed stare boring into me from across the yard. Our house felt like it was shrinking, the walls too close, the ceiling too low, and that damp smell got stronger, like wet dirt after a rain, but mixed with something rotten. I tried calling our daughter's name, just to make sure she was still okay upstairs, but my voice came out weak, swallowed up by the thick air. I ran up to check on her. Her room was freezing, the light still flickering, even though the switch was off. She was asleep, thank God, but her breath fogged in front of her face, and the window was cracked open just an inch, even though I'd locked it earlier. I shut it tight, my hands shaking, and when I looked out, Lisa's house stared back, those foggy windows glinting like they were watching me too. Back downstairs, Sarah was gone from the couch, panicked, tearing through the house, shouting her name, but she wasn't anywhere. The front door was still locked, the chair still jammed under it, so she hadn't gone outside, or so I thought. Then I heard it, a soft thump from the basement, where we never went, because it was just a damp, cobwebbed mess. My gut screamed at me to stay away, but I couldn't. I had to find her. The stairs creaked under my weight, louder than they should have, and the air down there was so cold my teeth hurt. When I flicked on the light, there was Sarah standing in the middle of the room, facing the wall, her back to me. The basement smelled like Lisa's house, like earth and decayed. The concrete floor was wet, pooling around her bare feet. I called her name, soft at first, then louder, but she didn't turn. Behind her, the wall looked wrong, darker, shinier, like it was sweating. Then she spoke, her voice flat. "She's here with us now." And I felt the hair on my neck stand up, because I knew she didn't mean our daughter. I stood there, staring at Sarah's back, my breath hitching as that wet spot on the wall started spreading, like ink bleeding through paper. The basement light flickered, buzzing loud in my ears, and every shadow down there twisted like it was moving on its own. I stepped closer, my shoes squishing on the soaked floor, and reached out to touch her shoulder. Her shirt was damp, clinging to her skin, and she felt wrong, like her body wasn't solid anymore. She turned her head just a little, not all the way, and I saw her eye black as Lisa's. No white left, just a void staring past me. My hand jerked back like I'd been burned, and I stumbled, almost falling into that slimy puddle. The air got heavier, pressing on my chest, and I swear I heard a whisper not from Sarah, but from the walls, low and garbled, like a voice trapped in the house itself. I wanted to run, grab our daughter, and get out, but my legs wouldn't listen. Something about that house, Lisa's house, had its claws in us now. Then Sarah moved slow, like a puppet on strings, and started walking toward the basement stairs. I yelled at her to stop, my voice cracking, but she didn't even pause, just climbed up, her wet feet slapping the wood. I followed, tripping over myself, and when I got upstairs, she was at the front window again, staring out at Lisa's place. The house next door looked worse than ever, the roof sagging more, the windows darker, like they'd swallowed the moonlight. I grabbed Sarah's arm, harder this time, and spun her around. Her face was slack, her mouth open just a little, and those black eyes locked on mine. My stomach lurched. It wasn't her anymore, not really. I begged her to say something, anything, but she just pointed at the window and whispered, "She wants you to." I turned, and Lisa was there, not in her house, but right outside ours. Her face pressed against the glass, her black eyes gleaming, her breath fogging the pane, even though she wasn't moving her mouth. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering so hard I thought it'd bust out of my chest. And Lisa just stayed there, her face smashed against the glass, not blinking, not moving, just watching. The room went cold fast, like someone flipped a switch, and the lights started flickering, throwing shadows that danced across the walls. Sarah didn't move either. She stood there, pointing, her black eyes fixed on me now, and that humming started again, louder, like it was coming from inside her. I could barely think straight. All I knew was I had to get our daughter and get out before whatever was in that house, Alyssa, whatever it was, took us all. I ran upstairs, my legs shaking so bad I nearly fell, and burst into her room. She was still in bed, curled up, but the window was wide open now, the curtains flapping like crazy. Even though there was no wind, I scooped her up, her little body warm against me, and that's when I heard a low groan. Not from her, but from the house itself, like the walls were waking up. I bolted back downstairs, clutching her tight, and Sarah was gone, a window empty, Lisa gone too, just the dark yard staring back at me. The front door was still locked, chairs still in place, but I didn't cry, kicked it out of the way and fumbled with the bolt, my hands slick with sweat. The air felt alive, buzzing around me, and that damp smell choked me, like the house was breathing it out. I got the door open and ran outside, barefoot, the grass cold and wet under my feet, my daughter whimpering in my arms. I didn't look back at our house, but I couldn't help glancing at Lisa's. The windows were pitch black now. No glint, no nothing, like they'd gone dead. I made it to the car, threw my daughter in the back, and peeled out, tires squealing on the gravel. My head was spinning, my chest tight, and all I could think was, we had to get away from that house, from Lisa, from whatever she'd done to Sarah. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw Sarah standing in the road behind us, staring, her black eyes catching the taillights, and Lisa right beside her, both of them still as stone. I drove like a maniac, hands shaking on the wheel, my daughter crying in the back seat, asking where Mommy was. I didn't know what to say. How do you tell a kid her mom's not her mom anymore? That something in that damn house took her? My eyes kept darting to the mirrors, expecting to see Sarah and Lisa behind us. But the road stayed empty, just dark and quiet. I didn't stop until we hit a gas station a few miles out. The fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, making everything feel a little less insane. My daughter fell asleep in the car, her face streaked with tears, and I just sat there, staring at my hands, trying to figure out what the hell happened. That house, Lisa's house, kept flashing in my head. The sagging porch, the foggy windows, the way it seemed to lean toward us like it wanted something. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that whatever was in there had let me go for now, but not for good. My phone buzzed Sarah's number, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. When I finally got the guts to head back home, it was almost dawn, the sky turning gray and heavy. I didn't want to go near that street, but I had to know. I parked a block away and walked, my daughter still out cold in the car. Our house looked normal from the outside, quiet, like nothing had happened, but Lisa's place was different. The windows were still black, dead looking, and the front door hung open, just a crack, swaying a little, even though there was no breeze. I didn't see Sarah anywhere. Didn't see Lisa either, just that house. Sitting there like it was waiting for me to come closer. I stood there, frozen, my breath fogging in the cold. And then I heard it one last hum, faint, drifting out from inside. My skin crawled, and I backed off, fast, not caring how crazy I looked. I got back to the car, locked the doors, and just sat there, watching the sun come up, trying to convince myself it was over. But deep down, I knew it wasn't Sarah was gone, taken by whatever Lisa was, and that house wasn't done with me yet. We didn't go back to the house after that. Ty couldn't. Not with my daughter asking about Sarah every 5 minutes and me having no answers. I crashed at a buddy's place a few towns over, told him some half-baked story about a fight with Sarah, so he wouldn't ask too much. But every night, I'd wake up sweating, feeling like those black ice blazes. Sarah's were still on me, like the house knew where I was. I'd check my phone, and there'd be missed calls from Sarah's number. No voicemails, just silence when I tried calling back. My daughter stopped asking after a while, but she'd stare out windows sometimes, quiet, like she was waiting to. I kept picturing that placed peeling paint, the warped floors, the way it smelled like something dead, and I'd wonder if it was Alyssa all along, back for revenge, or something worse that just wore her face. Either way, it got Sarah, and I still don't know how or why. All I know is I'm not going back, not ever. It's been weeks now, and things have gone quiet. No more calls, no more nightmares, just me and my kid trying to start over. But sometimes, when it's late and the house is still, I'll catch myself looking out the window, half expecting to see Lisa standing there, or Sarah, or both. Nothing's there, just the dark. But it doesn't feel empty, it feels like it's holding its breath. That house is still out there, rotting away in my hometown, and I can't shake the thought that it's waiting for me to slip up, to come back. I don't talk about it much. People would think I'm nuts, but I needed to get this out. See if anyone else has dealt with something like this. It stopped as sudden as it started. No explanation, no closure, just gone. And I'm still here, jumping at shadows, wondering if it's really over or if that damn house is just biding its time.